Halfway through the album, we reach what's possibly my absolute favourite cover version of Robbie's in this album, Mr. Bojangles. While many of the songs up to this point, and even afterwards, are fun and decent in one way or another, this one is the definite standout in my opinion. It's also possibly the most recent of these songs, if you get what I mean, having been written in 1968 by country folk artist Jerry Jeff Walker, who was still alive when this version and album came out, but of course eventually passed away by October 2020. The song itself was inspired by a homeless street performer he once met in jail, and the performer himself called himself Mr. Bojangles to conceal his true identity from the police, naming himself after famed tap dancer Bill Bojangles Robertson. The song in question, of course, had been covered by many artists such as Bob Dylan, Neil Diamond, Nina Simone, Sammy J. Davis Jr., you see a pattern here? And most notably, the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. But it's this version by Robbie Williams that I was introduced to and therefore most familiar with. I'm sure the other versions of the song are all good in and of themselves, but I still find myself gravitating towards this one here. It has a very nice and quiet beginning, a bit of hi-hats and some faintly plucking strings forming the general beat and melodic backbone, and then that distinct whistling from Robbie that I used to imitate myself every time I used to hear this at a young age. And honestly, I don't know what happened since then because I lost any and all ability to whistle anymore. The lyrics, of course, speak of a man named, well, Mr. Bojangles, or at least a fictionalized version of such. How he dressed, how he jumped so high, how he worked at minstrel shows for many years, so many years, and so on and so forth. But soon, his dog passes away, and so would he. And throughout all that, we get a fantastic build-up over a good course of the song as Robbie sings about the highs and lows of this mysterious and enigmatic person, even singing as him in this sort of crusty voice. I say this is the vocal equivalent of blackface, black voice, if you will, but since that homeless man I mentioned earlier being the inspiration for the song was actually apparently white, it's really hard to say. Finally, 2 minutes in, and it all culminates at the last minute and a quarter with this big climax as Robbie sings about this man shook his head and swearing he could hear someone calling and pleading good old Mr. Bojangles to dance again. The music, Robbie's vocals, everything just feels grander, larger than life. It almost feels cinematic in a way. Then it all dies back down again as it bookends with that same whistling as the opening, only with a bit more resolve on the last note. I honestly don't know what else I could say about this. It's just something you'd have to listen to in order to feel and believe it. I know I may be hyping this up a little bit, but you'd be impressed when you remember that this is from a freaking member of Take That. After such an epic and tremendous song, we then settle things down a bit with the next track, One for My Baby, written by Harold Arleen and Johnny Mercer, and first sung by Fred Astaire for the 1943 musical rom-com film The Sky's the Limit. Once again, almost everyone and anyone you could think of had performed this at some point. Louis Armstrong, Marlene Dietrich, Cab Calloway, Vaughn Monroe, Frankie Lane, Billie Holiday, Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, Dean Martin, Nat King Cole, Sammy Davis Jr., Jerry Lewis, Tony Bennett, Chuck Berry, Marvin Gaye, Lou Reed, Bette Midler, Iggy Pop, Sylvester Stallone's younger brother, Kenny G, just scraping the surface as much as I humanly can. Anyway, the song itself, or at least Robbie's rendition of it, is very calm, chill, and slow in a good way. This piano-centric piece is very much a throwback to the kind of music you'd hear at a nightclub in the 30s or 40s, or even those noir films like Casablanca, Night in the City, and The Big Combo. And even the lyrics themselves seem to paint this sort of setting, with a lone patron singing to an equally lone bartender. How it's 2:45, as in 2:45, and how there's no one else except for these two. If it's at AM, then it would be pretty late and be the sort of time I'd end up writing and recording my episodes. And if it's at PM, then everyone else has probably already gone back to work. So set 'em up, Joe. I got a little story I think you should know. Now, this is a story all about how my life got turned upside down. We're drinking my friend to the end of a brief episode. Unfortunately, they were watching an episode on Netflix, which means a season would usually be about 8 episodes instead of the standard 13 or 26, and each of those episodes would be about 40 to 45 minutes each long instead of, half that time. Make it one for my baby and one more for the road. I mean, seriously, I think I left my baby in the car, and I really gotta check on him. Near the end of the song, we get a very nice saxophone to play along with Robbie's vocals, and another good example of call and response. This bit actually reminds me of the Phil Collins song, If Leaving Me Is Easy, which I may have talked about years ago in my face value review. It may not be the happiest song, but it's certainly a bittersweet one. It's worth playing for your baby and worth playing on the road. By that I mean when you're driving. What could be considered a happy song would be the next one, Things. Yet another duet, this time with actress Jane Horrocks, who's well known from TV shows such as Absolutely Fabulous, Fifi and the Flower Tots, and Little Princess, while I know her as the voice of Babs from Chicken Run. The song was originally written and sung by Bobby Darin as a solo back in 1962. This may not be as memorable as, say, Something Stupid or Well Did You Ever, but it is certainly an upbeat tune of its own, with a bit of a skippy beat to it. While Jane could be considered a backup here, singing the last word of each line and verse, she certainly adds a bit of a range here and there, even having a bit of a carefree personality to it. The lyrics sing about a person looking out his window and down at the avenue, seeing people holding hands and laughing, and he starts remembering things he used to do with the one he loved, such as a walk in the park, a kiss in the dark, a sailboat ride, or even the night they cried. Cried about what exactly? I don't know. They probably saw the ending of both Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. Or maybe that wild robot movie I heard about. One could also interpret this song in general as being about a somewhat older couple watching younger lovers pass on by as they're being reminded of what they themselves were like at such a younger age. One thing I would nitpick though is that the ending of the song does drag on at least a little bit. But it does make up for it by having Robbie and Jane just speak as themselves and just sort of ramble and mumble each other as the song just keeps on going. Even, I think, mentioning Kylie Minogue at one point, I think. Then as soon as the music actually wraps up and finishes, Robbie just rushes his bit, says goodbye, and we hear a door closing. It's out of place, yet seems to be on par with his witty sense of humour. We then kick things back up again a bit further with Ain't That a Kick in the Head. Written in 1960 by composer Jimmy Van Heusen and lyricist Sammy Cahn. That's Cahn as in C-A-H-N, not K-H-A-N, okay? Okay. Anyway, some of you may know the two as they would go on to write a few songs for the underrated 1967 Julie Andrews musical Thoroughly Modern Millie. And not only that, Sammy Cahn was also the co-writer for the classic Let It Snow song, Again, the more you know. Singer and actor Dean Martin was the first to perform this piece for the classic 1960 heist film Ocean's 11, as in the original, not the remake that most people are familiar with George Clooney, or that Ocean's 8 film that we all forgot was a thing. And not to mention, Dean also starred in the original, along with, of course, Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. I should really get a money job for the amount of times I mentioned certain singers and musicians in this review. And much like Well Did You Ever, Straighten Up and Fly Right, and Do Nothing Till You Hear From Me, this song is very upbeat and packed with so much punchy brass I could almost smell and taste it. And I probably shouldn't eat brass. Anyways, on the subject of cover versions, even Westlife, of all people, would do their rendition of the song in 2004 for their album, Allow Us to Be Frank. Get it? Be frank. Frank, as in whatever. In which they would do their own takes on many classic swinging big band songs, including Mac the Knife as well, coincidentally enough. That all said, though, as serviceable this song is, or at least Robbie's version is, there's not too much else I could really say about this, honestly. And with as far as it is into the track list, this is either one you'll likely listen to or quickly skip. Either way, it's a kick to the ears. Next, we followed up with They Can't Take That Away From Me. Another duet in the album, this time featuring actor Rupert Everett. So when you think about it, across this album, we've had Dougal from the Magic Roundabout film sing with Satine from Moulin Rouge, Radio from Brave Little Toaster, Babs from Chicken Run, and now Prince Charming from the Shrek films. Go figure. And it seems like the most weirdest crossover you can imagine. Or maybe not, considering Pooh's adventures. Anyway, the song was composed in 1937 by brothers Ira and George Gershwin, the former having done the lyrics while the latter had done the music score. In fact, you might recognize George for composing the classical jazz composition Rhapsody in Blue. You may not know it by name, but you would have likely heard it at some point. I myself heard it from both Fantasia 2000 and the Classic Experience CD. By the way, does anyone else actually remember those Classic Experience CDs? I certainly did. There were a few number of those, and even a spin-off or two. Back to this song, it was first sung by, again, Fred Astaire for the 1937 RKO musical comedy film Shall We Dance? And it probably would have been one of the last things George Gershwin would have ever been involved in, as he passed away soon from a brain tumor in July 37. But he did leave behind a legacy with this track alone, as it had been sung and recorded by, again, many artists over the decades, Bing Crosby, Billie Holiday, Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, Tony Bennett, Cliff Richard, Rod Stewart, Van Morrison, Elvis Costello, Lisa Stanfield, etc. etc. The song itself is seemingly meant to be about the singer admiring another person's looks and traits, the way they wear their hat, sip their tea, smiling and singing off key, etc. And how they can never be taken away. However, in this kind of context, with Robert and Rupert singing together like this, it just seems like they're singing about each other. And on to the fact that Rupert happens to be gay, and we have ourselves, as TV tropes would put it, a ho-yay moment. I'm sure a lot of terminally online people on Tumblr and Twitter will be having fun with this one. The music itself, however, is very snazzy and groovy with its brass and hi-hat beat bit like the classic Pink Panther theme or something of that era. It may not be as energetic as some of the other songs here, but it's fine the way it is, and they can't take that away from me. Speaking of songs from 1937, we then Have You Met Miss Jones, which was also featured in the soundtrack for the film Bridget Jones' Diary, released earlier that year, same year in 2001. The song was actually originally written for the musical I'd Rather Be Right by lyricist Lorenz Hart and composer Richard Rodgers of Rodgers and Hammerstein fame. The songwriting duo behind beloved musicals such as Oklahoma, Carousel, The King and I, and most famously, The Sound of Music. And hey, since the 1956 film adaptations of Carousel and King and I, as well as the 1965 version of Sound of Music, were all distributed by 20th Century Fox, they're all now technically owned by Disney. I'm sure they'll do a new version of those musicals, perhaps maybe even animated. Oh, wait. Warner Bros. Already did one for The King and I with that Black Cauldron as One Princess director in 1999. And it wasn't all that good. Well, I'm sure instead they'll do a nostalgia-baiting sequel to The Sound of Music that no one actually asked for with, like, Emily Blunt as Maria von Trapp or something. What was I talking about again? Oh yeah, Robbie Williams and Miss Jones. The song too was covered by several people over the years. Bing Crosby, Anita O'Day, Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, even the creator of Family Guy himself, Seth MacFarlane, would do his own rendition in one of his many swing cover albums. And yes, Seth had made a few albums over the 2010s and 20s. And yes, in case you hadn't noticed, he too is a real big fan of swing and big band music and classical music numbers, as if half the songs that appear in Family Guy weren't any indication. But I digress. The song itself is yet another straightforward love song of sorts, admiring this woman named, well, Miss Jones, and how she's a girl who understands how she made him lose his breath and how they'll keep on meeting till they die. Did I call this a straightforward love song? Because that last bit I said might make this sound like a song about a stalker. Regardless of that, Robbie still sounds like he's in his element here as he's been so far in this record. I may have met this specific Miss Jones, but if this song was to be an indication, she must have been one fine lass. And hot. After that, we come to the penultimate song, Me and My Shadow. Our last duet on the album, this time with TV presenter Jonathan Wilkes. Written in 1927 by Al Johnson, Dave Druya, and Billy Rose, this track too will be covered by many people, Bing Crosby and Judy Garland, Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., Michael Ball and Antonio Banderas. Even Jeff Goldblum and Sarah Silverman would do their own rendition at one point. I wonder how that version goes. Like the wallpaper sticks to the wall, like the seashore clings to the sea, like you'll never get rid of your shadow. You'll never get rid of me. Checkmate. Chaos theory. But then again, he's also playing the great and powerful wizard in our upcoming Wicked two-parter. I wonder how I would sing a sentimental man in Wonderful. Anyway, back to the song. Just like with Lovitz in Well Did You Ever, Robbie and Wilkes certainly play off each other just as well here. Already having a bit of a banter right off the bat and out of the gate at the start of the song. They take turns in singing a verse each or even sing in unison together. I also like how they don't make it clear as to which one is the shadow and which one is the me. They're kind of each other's shadows in a way. And I'm quite fascinated by Jungian philosophy. And I know I said that They Can't Take That Away From Me may have a bit of a gay undertone to it. This one, however, certainly steps it up a bit to say the least, with a line that literally goes, "We're closer to Smog, to all of LA, we're closer than Ricky is to confessing he's gay." Now, I'm sure it might have meant something differently back in the olden days, but currently, I wouldn't be surprised if there were indeed some Tumblrites shipping Robbie and some other popular male celebrity. Maybe Gary Barlow or something. Then there's something of a false climax in which the orchestra plays the last note before going silent as Robbie and Wilkes briefly argue about wanting to do it all again, one of them being too tired and the other trying to offer some money, a cup of tea, or even saying he won't tell anyone he's gay. Again, no undertones or overtones here whatsoever. Totally. And so, our album finally ends with another one some of you might already know, Beyond the Sea, based off the 1945 song La Mer, or The Sea, by French singer and songwriter Charles Trenet, which was then adapted into English the following year in 1946 as Beyond the Sea by Bobby Darin. If you never heard it from this album, it's likely you might have heard it from the 2003 Pixar film Finding Nemo, sending credits. But hey, at least it's not another Randy Newman song we'd have to put up with. This song is really both soothing and energized, at least this version is. Definitely captures the feeling of just laying on a beach during a beautiful sunset, or even chilling on a boat as it rides the calm waves of the ocean. And I think that piano definitely plays a small part in that, having this serene jazzy vibe to it, of course. Even when beneath the rest of the orchestra. After so many high, upbeat and bombastic tracks that preceded, and the occasional relaxing song, it's nice to have one that's a bit of both to close out this album. There are also a few minutes of outtakes and bloopers after like 20 minutes or so in silence, like a hidden track, at least in the CD version. Though it's mostly just Robbie flubbing some of his lines and bits of orchestral strings. Not much more to say, though it may offer a bit little insight into behind the scenes of Robbie and the whole crew working on this album. So, that was Robbie Williams' Swing When You're Winning. And this album is pretty decent, even when I try to set aside the rose-tinted nostalgia goggles and headphones. Now, I may not be as big a fan of swing and big band music, but listening to this almost made me one. At least made me appreciate it a bit more. Robbie has certainly demonstrated that he can not only do solo stuff, but also expand in terms of musical styles, as well as play homage to many classic singers and musicians of old days of yore. My favourite versions that he had done here are Something Stupid, It Was a Very Good Year, Straighten Up and Fly Right, Mr. Bojangles, and Me and My Shadow. And like I said, this album proved to be another hit for Robbie. So much so that he would eventually do another swing cover album just 12 years later in 2013 called Swing Both Ways. Get it? Which features a more general mix of both covers and originals. I haven't exactly listened to the entirety of that one yet, but one thing to note is that one of the covers in that album is of I Wanna Be Like You from Disney's The Jungle Book, which he does as a duet with Ollie Murs of all people. And we thought Christopher Walken's version in the Jon Favreau version was weird. And it is, but still. But regardless, if you're a fan of Robbie Williams, or a fan of classic big bands and swing music, or even a fan of both, I can recommend this. And I even recommend Robbie Williams Live at the Albert, a DVD released around the same time of this album, where he performs all the songs off the album at the Royal Albert Hall, plus a few extra ones as well, including a version of Frank Sinatra's My Way, which he did include in the album for some reason. Possible letdown and wasted opportunity there. Next time, several things will be going on for a while, Anorak is already around the corner. There'll be some short reviews for shorter subjects that'll hopefully take less time to write about. Hopefully, fingers crossed. And our series of requests should continue soon later on.